This is 3:30. Never easy when you want it to be. Hello, everyone. Welcome to City of Powell River Committee of the Whole meeting, Tuesday, July 11th, 2023. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Tla'amin territory, and I want to express appreciation for their stewardship of this land since time immemorial. Before I go into the agenda, there's a few reminders that the chair often shares when we have a crowd in the room. So just a reminder that our job is here to govern, and we appreciate your support in that by not providing a lot of vocalization, cheering, booing, that sort of thing. It helps us do our job by listening to the delegations and the speakers, and you are always welcome to share your thoughts with council by email or by writing it to us in the grocery store. And the other thing is, for those who are speaking today and also for those who might use our Q&A period at the end, to make sure that you get to the heart of the matter before your time is up. So the delegations have 10 minutes each, and I'll be timing that. And for the Q&A portion at the end, rather than spending too much time on preamble, get pretty quick to your questions so that we're able to address it in a timely manner. So appreciate your cooperation. And with that note, I will start with adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes that we need to take care of in the agenda today? No. Any changes from council? Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda from Councillor Almeida first and seconded Councillor Doudt? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Actually, before I mention that, we have one councillor, Councillor Elliott, is absent with leave for medical issues, and the mayor's joining by phone today. So next item is adoption of the minutes. Could I have a mover to adopt the agenda? Councillor Doudt. Any issues with the agenda to correct? Oh, minutes, sorry. Any issues with the minutes? Seconder. I'm forgetting my order. It's been a few months since I've been in this chair. Councillor Almeida, seconder. Any issues with the minutes? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Next up, we have delegations. The first delegation is Soo Big Oil Committee regarding update on Fair Share / Soo Big Oil. So welcome to come out, introduce yourselves, and you've got 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the local Soo Big Oil Committee, part of a BC-wide campaign involving volunteers from many communities. I'm Angelica Hackett with Neil Abramson and Jordana Pangburn. To help answer questions, we also have my fellow taxpayer Bob Hackett and special guest Andrew Gage from West Coast Environmental Law, which is coordinating the campaign. We've been endorsed by the Council of Canadians, Carthet Climate Alliance, Let's Talk Trash, and Fridays for Future, but we were also inspired by a recent petition calling for the city to maintain our infrastructure without big property tax increases. That's our goal too, as we face rising climate change costs. We'd like Council to adopt a motion, similar to the town of View Royal, something like this: to commit to join a proposed class action suit against selected fossil fuel companies, contingent upon other BC cities joining and raising a combined minimum of $500,000, and to set aside $1 per resident for this purpose. The full wording is in your handout. Neil will explain next.
Your Worship.
Neil, could I get you to move your microphone towards your mouth so that people online can hear? Thank you.
Your Worship, Mayor Wasnow, and honored council persons. Soo Big Oil, in my opinion, is not about saving the world from climate change. It's about dealing with the costs that have been produced by oil companies. This is a question of law. It is a question about fraud. It is a question about corporate ethics. It's about oil companies who have misrepresented the truth, even though they knew what the truth was. And it's about talking about well-established legal remedies for dealing with issues like that have been done in the past. Oil companies have been misrepresenting their products for 50 years. They've known about the relationship between their products and climate change since 1959, and they didn't believe it. So they set their scientists to do research to prove that it was wrong. And by the 1970s, they knew it was true. So what did they do? They set out to make sure that the governments and the public wouldn't know. They funded climate change denier research, and those people proved to their satisfaction that it was periodic world climate fluctuations. Some people argued it was sunspots, but they knew. And the projections that their scientists made in the 1970s are eerily the same as what we're facing today with climate change issues. Their goal was to call science into doubt and to confuse regulators and their customers and shareholders, and they actually funded political campaigns to elect and install judges and legislators who were hostile to the possibility of litigation. This was all done to protect their profits. And how big were those profits? The Guardian reports that in those 50 years, big oil made $52 billion, $1 trillion, I was corrected before, in profits. A lot of that went to the petro states that supplied the oil. But the 6 largest oil companies in 2022 made $219 billion in profits. I'm not an anti-corporate person. I'm a corporate person. I'm a retired business professor. For 25 years, I taught people from corporations how to make bigger profits. I mean, that's fair. But our goal with Sue Big Oil is to keep Powell River taxes down by making big oil pay for this deceit. Suing corporations for misrepresenting their products is an established practice in our society and across the Western world. In 1998, Big Tobacco paid $206 billion US for health costs that they had caused for hiding for decades the relationship between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer. Big Pharma knew all along that their opioids were addictive, and recently Purdue has agreed to pay $150 million in compensation for selling addictive opioid products. Ford had to pay for its exploding Pinto cars in the 20th century, and Toyota paid for unintended acceleration. When you stepped on the brake, the car went faster. And VW paid for concealing that diesel engines were not green. How much should big oil pay? One researcher has estimated that big oil is responsible for 25% of greenhouse gas that's in the atmosphere. Exxon by itself is 3.5%. But what does Powell River do? Little Powell River trying to take on such big companies. We're asking, Powell River's actually already started trying. In 2018, the previous council sent a letter asking oil companies to share climate change costs for rising sea levels, coastal erosion, fire risk, extreme winter rain events, and there was no answer from Big Oil. Sue Big Oil is asking, that Powell River join a class action suit. 60% of public infrastructure in Canada is owned and operated by municipal governments. Who's going to pay the 60% of climate change costs? That's the question. The Insurance Bureau of Canada estimates that there's going to be $5.3 billion worth of infrastructure changes or costs related to climate adaptation. We've already paid $800,000 in Powell River for the seawalk to have it rebuilt after a storm. Should we, the taxpayers, have to pay for the mistruths that the oil companies have knowingly given us for years about the burning of their products? Thank you very much. Ms. Pangborn will be concluding for us.
Hello. I grew up here and I love this place. I just turned 20 and today's wealth inequality is beyond comparable to what it was in my parents' youth. So is today's frequency of extreme weather events. The damage to public infrastructure by climate change is only going to get worse. And municipal governments rely heavily on business and property taxes to fund those repairs. I don't want my family's hard-earned money to pay for the negligence of big oil. So I believe in science, and I believe in the case that West Coast environmental law has made. In 2018, Powell River City Council supported the idea that big oil should pay its fair share of climate costs. I hope it will now take action to back up that commitment. Climate change and wealth inequality are issues that my generation cares about. And we don't want to pay for the mistakes of self-serving companies that came before us. 63% of this city's residents readily signed Sue Big Oil petitions when approached during canvassing. A total of 315 people have signed so far, including 64 students from Brooks Secondary School. And across BC, 69% of people surveyed support the lawsuit when they understand that it's a way to get fossil fuel companies to pay for some of the costs that otherwise fall to taxpayers, and only 19% opposed it. To conclude, this is an issue of taxes and Powell River's ability to meet the rising costs of the climate emergency. Big oil companies knew they contributed a lot to this crisis, but have avoided much accountability while maintaining huge profits. A class action lawsuit is a well-tried and successful way to get compensation for destructive corporate products and practices. Next election, my Brooks classmates and fellow graduates will be voting. This is an important issue to us. Please don't let us down. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Under the 10 minutes, that's great. So the way that this works, just for folks in the audience and listening in online, we are not council, we're committee of the whole today, so we might ask questions, and you're welcome to actually stay at the mic. We may have questions for you, and any final decision that council will make will have to be referred to council at a future time. I want to open it up for questions from council first. Do we have any questions of our delegation today? Councillor Southcott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, presenters. So my question is specifically regarding the View Royal motion that was passed there. I think it would be very useful for council to know the details of that, and I have a follow-up question, if I may, once you do present the details of that motion.
I'm Andrew Gage, staff lawyer with West Coast Environmental Law, and I did present to View Royal Council when they made that vote. I'm not sure exactly which details you're looking for, but it was passed, I believe, with one dissent, and otherwise was supported by the council that was there. And similar to is being suggested here, the commitment was to join that lawsuit when there was $500,000 raised by municipalities coming into the lawsuit. I don't know if there's further detail you're looking for there.
Yeah, so specifically, I'll clarify that first question. So you're looking for $500,000 at $1 per taxpayer, if I understand the details correctly. And that View Royal's motion, the one part of it that I was curious about, or that I remember in reading it a short time ago, is that it stipulated that their municipality would be held to their commitment if enough taxpayers across British Columbia, in other words, 500,000, would commit to, or the local governments that represented that many British Columbians would commit to to this proposal of $1 per taxpayer?
The Sue Big Oil campaign proposes a class action lawsuit, and the idea is to have a wide range of communities representing a large portion of BC's population committing to that. That's both to give support to the municipalities that actually finally lend their name to the case at the end of the day, but also to demonstrate the broad support for the fossil fuel industry paying a fair share of the costs that BC communities are experiencing. And View Royal, did adopt the 500,000 figure as sort of their basis for conversation. Their motion is, I think, a little general in terms of, it expresses that in terms of dollars, and it could be that they would accept it if other municipalities put in, decide to put in more money or funds came from other sources. But they definitely, the intention that they were, I think that they understood the intention to be that that they were hoping that municipalities totaling a population of 500,000 would be joining the suit. Yes.
So just to be absolutely clear on this, then View Royal would not be held responsible for that commitment if that target was not met.
That's the way their motion was worded, and we view that as a good, I mean, it's always been the intention of the campaign that a lot of municipalities need to come together to do this. So we were very happy with that as an approach.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Other questions from council? I've got a question. What other municipalities have signed on at this point? You mentioned View Royal. Yeah.
At this point, it's Gibson's and View Royal.
Okay.
We briefly had Vancouver, but the current council has backed away from the previous council's position on that.
Thank you. Councillor Almeida.
Follow up. Thank you, Chair. Follow up to Councillor Isaacson's question. How many councils have been approached?
In terms of motions going forward, it's just those three. The campaign itself is just over a year old. We've always thought that we needed to talk to people and build awareness about the campaign before making a lot of approaches. So you are other than Vancouver, who was banked away from it, you would be the third council to vote on this after Gibson's and View Royal.
So just to...
Yes, there are active campaigns in perhaps a dozen communities around the province, and some of those are representing more than one municipality. There are also, of course, as was mentioned, Palo River sent a letter in 2018 to fossil fuel companies asking them to voluntarily take responsibility for their products. And there were 24 communities that sent letters of that type. So I think there's a solid basis for more of these motions going forward. But at this point, there's just the two that have actually voted on it, plus Vancouver.
So just to clarify, then only those 3 or 4 municipalities you mentioned have been presented to their committees or councils?
Yeah, we've had meetings with a number of councillors in different communities, but in terms of actual delegations to council, this is the 3rd or 4th, yeah.
Great. Councillor Palm.
Thank you, through the chair. Appreciate the presentation here today. Climate change is on everybody's mind, it seems, these days, and there's no way around it. However, I have a couple of questions I need answered. And that is, I'm curious, in your delivery today, the previous speakers that were here made reference to big tobacco. And there was a settlement that came in, I believe the figure, the year was 1989 or 98. So do you have any idea when that started and how long it took to resolution?
My specifics are weak, but what I can tell you is that a few municipalities started that action, and I assume that Big Tobacco laughed. Eventually, 46 states out of 50 had joined that lawsuit, because when it got going, more and more states saw that this was an opportunity because there were such horrendous costs related to lung cancer. And when Big Tobacco was faced with 46 states, they settled.
So my question was, when did it start and how long did it take to get to 1998?
I think it took most of the 90s as a decade.
Took a long time. So these things start from the grassroots, as you alluded to, with maybe a few councils agreeing, but the bulk of the movement and the muscle behind it was whether, I don't know if it was federal involvement, but state involvement for sure. And it's higher level politics than just a little municipal that get things done on this big scale.
Well, you
So,
know,
yeah, start somewhere, but you know, what we need is the province and the federal government getting
So
behind
Palm, just on questions right now.
for sure.
Just
it's
questions.
logical. It's logical that we would be here early because this council in 20 is one of the first councils to suggest this idea. You're absolutely correct, sir. You're absolutely correct that it takes a much bigger push than a little town can do. But the advantage for Powell River is that this is an important election issue that can only grow stronger. And once we're on board, then there will be powers. It'll be controlled from Vancouver. It'll be controlled from Victoria. It'll be controlled from someplace big. And we will be on board early, and it's a good thing to be.
So we did do the right thing last term by supporting that initiative when it started. And as you said, it's higher up that's going to get this job done, not just little Powell River.
Ultimately, you're absolutely correct, but at least we'll be the good guys, if nothing else.
I may comment on that. And one of the reasons, first of all, public municipalities, as was mentioned, own 60% of public infrastructure. They have the fewest resources in terms of being able to pay for the costs associated with keeping their communities safe. So one way or another, every level of government should be considering how are we going to pay for this? Is it fair just to put these costs onto our taxpayers and not make some good faith effort to try to recover these costs on behalf of our taxpayers? The provincial and federal governments have not begun to grapple with this issue. Local governments, I think, in some ways are further along because you are on the front lines of this. And the proposal is not that Powell River go it alone here. The proposal is that a class action lawsuit representing at least 500,000 people allows local governments to pool their resources and punch well above the weight of any one individual municipality. So, and in terms of the timelines, which are important, I mean, and you're right, these cases can take a decade or more to resolve. Although in some cases, the opioid case that the BC launched was settled within a couple of years with at least one of the companies. But they can take years. But much of your planning for infrastructure is decades in the future. You are building things now that are intended to be completed a decade or more from now and are intended to benefit your community for generations. So this isn't that different in terms of the timelines. And in terms of focusing on recovering costs, yeah, that you're right, it can take a while. But in terms of sending a message to fossil fuel companies that they have to take responsibility, they have to consider these costs in their business decisions. The moment a lawsuit is filed, even when it's being discussed potentially, but certainly when it's filed, they have to notify their shareholders from day one that they're being sued. And it begins to affect the business decisions right away. And the Grantham Institute from the London School of Economics actually has measured that effect, that filing lawsuits and certainly positive judgments in those lawsuits have an economic impact on the stock prices of fossil fuel companies. That's been demonstrated by academics. So there are many reasons and many timeframes that are in play here, but I don't think you should let that stand in the way of working with other local governments to protect your taxpayers from the cost of climate change.
All right.
Chair, I just have a follow-up comment to that.
We're still on questions and still on questions and we'll do comments after. Yeah, comment or question?
So I just want to finish by saying the movement is young. It's in its infancy. I'd like to see more jurisdictions come on board with your cause. And one of the things that's holding me back of voting for this, whether it comes to council.
Yeah, we're still on questions, Councillor Palm. We'll get to discussion in a moment.
I think it's an important fact that I believe the group perhaps visited one of our ratepayer groups and was asked to do the same thing. And what I understand, they didn't sign on. And I sit here as representing them.
Are you referring to one of the ratepayer groups?
Referring to the Westview Ratepayer.
Yeah, they weren't asked to sign on. We just presented the case to them. We did not ask for a vote. We had, I think, 15 minutes total discussion of a complex issue, and they had many other things on their agenda. So we haven't really had that discussion, frankly, with the ratepayers, the Westview ratepayers yet. And I'm looking forward to maybe doing that in their next meeting in September.
Communication is the key, absolutely.
Absolutely. But I mean, we are, let's face it, we're all volunteers. So we have limited people power. So we have to go, where it seems most efficient to proceed.
All right, we're still on questions. Councillor Southcott wants to go again, but Mayor, did you have a question, or Councillor Doubt before we go into second round? Mayor?
I do.
Yeah.
The question is this, and it's based on the science, that prior to the petroleum industries developing around the world, we use coal or lignite to produce a significant amount of energy. Now when we use petroleum products, for every unit of energy being created, there's 60% less carbon dioxide, considerably less nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulates. The question is, how do you rationalize asking for compensation for an industry that significantly improved what would have happened if that industry didn't exist?
So first of all, we use Sue Big Oil in the name of the campaign as a shorthand for all fossil fuel industry. So coal certainly is part of the conversation about the legal responsibility for selling products that you know are going to cause climate change, or that one knows will cause climate change. And I think the coal industry bears a very long history, and in many cases it was some of the same companies. So I'm not sure it's an either or proposition. But at the end of the day, if you are selling a product that you know causes harm, but it's somewhat less harmful than a previous product, that doesn't absolve you of liability, for liability from a legal point of view. You need to take all reasonable steps to address the harm your products are causing. And in fact, we have an industry here that, Shell in 1989 internally said that if they continued on a path to a business as usual path in terms of its products, that civilization could prove to be a fragile thing. And then they spent the next decades advocating for that business as usual path. Right? You have a responsibility when faced with the realization that your product, even if better than its predecessors, is causing harm, to take all reasonable steps to move to an alternative approach, one that doesn't cause that harm. Or there's potential for legal liability. Now, at the end of the day, we all play a role in causing climate change. We've all benefited from these products. But that fact, taxpayers are on the hook for almost all of the costs of climate change.
I think you've answered the question, so I'm going to interrupt for time purposes. Additional follow-up to that question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, quickly.
There's a different answer. In 1972, President Nixon was forced to resign, not because of the burglaring of the Democratic Convention, but because of the lying about doing it. We're not going after big oil because they produce greenhouse gas. They do. And there would be some climate benefits if they didn't, but there would be a lot less civilization. What we're going after big oil for is because they misled everybody. They knew what they were doing, and they told us that it was not them doing it. There was no connection. We're going after them because they misled the public. They misled all of us. We're the ones who burned all the oil and the gas. We're the ones who produced all of the climate change. But we did it because they told us it was safe, and they knew while they were telling us that it wasn't safe. That's what we're doing.
Thank you. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. There's a really great book recently published by Jeff Dembicki called The Petroleum Papers that documents what you're speaking to. I'm in the middle of that book right now. The question is, can you speak to, so this is a fairly new initiative here in British Columbia. There are related court actions, one I heard about recently in Ontario, not directly exactly like this, but it was youth related to climate change. But I don't think we know about precedents to this kind of action that have occurred, for example, in the United States, that's often ahead of us. in progressive actions. I just wonder if you could briefly give us just a brief list perhaps of actions and how far down the road they are, maybe stateside or otherwise and internationally.
There are now 40 local and state governments in a couple of dozen lawsuits in the U.S. bringing cases against fossil fuel companies under a variety of different legal theories. Slightly more than 40, yeah. The most recent one was in Oregon. Multnomah County filed just within the last month. And they are, for the most part, at the relatively early stage. They've been hung up with a bunch of procedural motions that don't arise in Canadian law. Those issues have relatively recently resolved, so those cases will probably be moving forward in the near future. And certainly one or two of them, for example, the city of Honolulu, has had courts rule that their case has merit and should be allowed to proceed to trial. There's also cases, there's a case in Germany brought on behalf of a Peruvian community, so an interesting international argument against the German coal company, RWE, that the German courts have said has merit and should be proceed to trial. And there was a case, although not for damages, so not exactly the same as we're talking about here, but the Friends of the Earth Netherlands successfully sued Shell Oil for to force it to take responsibility for the harm caused by their products and to reduce the emissions, not just from their own operations, but also from the products being burnt, their products being burnt by the end user. And so, although not exactly the same, that's a really important precedent in terms of emphasizing that it's not just their own emissions, but the emissions from their products that they are ultimately accountable for. And the court was very clear that it was the history of sort of some of the issues that we're talking about in terms of the history of deception and the potential for the company to move forward more quickly that caused it to reach that conclusion. There's a handful of other cases, but those would be the main ones.
Thank you.
I think we're wrapped up on questions, so I think you can take a seat and we'll get into discussion about how council wants to proceed. And we've got I'm sure a few people want to speak. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you. I'd like to move that we refer this to staff to bring us back a resolution to a council meeting that we can debate based on View Royal's resolution.
So we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a seconder? I'll second it. Just into discussion. So we have a motion to send it to council or to staff and to bring it back to council. Councillor Doudt.
I think if I got the motion right, the motion was to ask staff to bring back a report on what View Royal did for possible support by council. I think that's the motion. And if that's what we're asking for, I'm in favor of it. That report will come back to council. We'll look at the information, consider it in the light of the delegation we've had here tonight and make our decision. I'm not making any commitment one way or another to how I would treat that report after it gets here, but I think getting the report makes sense. Talk about what we would be doing to commit ourselves, what the cost now and in the future would be to the city, and what the potential future benefits or costs might be. It's all a good idea.
Thank you. Other comments on the motion? I'll just give the mayor an opportunity in case. All right. So we have a motion on the floor to refer this to staff to come to report back to council. Oh, yep.
Clarify the motion,
Yep.
Chair, and I want to ask our CAO, wouldn't be a time commitment beyond staff's current workload, because I am concerned we've got a lot on our plate right now. This would just be a simple phone call to get a copy of that motion that was passed there. Is that correct?
Yes, I see it being a simple, short exercise.
Thank you.
All right, I'll call a question. All in favor of the motion on the floor? And looks like it's passed unanimously. I'm checking in because Mayor's on the phone. Is he texting you if he's a?
I agree.
Okay, thanks. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Sarah Dent regarding pending subdivision application for PID 011-158-166 in Wildwood. And I'm just going to give people we'll do a 2-minute recess just for people to leave the room and not be too disruptive. Thanks, everyone. But while you're leaving, if you want to stick around and see democracy in action, I highly recommend you stay for the full meeting.
They got important. Yeah.
All right, I'll bring us back into meeting. So back to delegation. Oh, hold on. Great. Delegation 3.2, Sarah Dent. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the time today. I know that everybody is very, very busy and pressed for time. So I'm here to talk to council about PID 011-158-166, which is 19 acres in Wildwood. Here we go. I'm used to having my presentation in front of me. So this is a lot that is zoned RA1. It was zoned back in the 1960s. We did a walk around of the block just to talk to residents that live directly there. This is actually really distracting for me. Sorry. So basically, the lot was zoned in the 1960s, but most of the homes abutting the lot were built in the 70s. So I live in a 1974 house. Most of the houses there are 74, 75, 78. You can see a lot. I call it the Powell River Special. You can see a lot of the kit houses that are around that block. So it's the same owner as the Tides, which is where the motorhomes are. And the Tides manager is also responsible for that 19-acre lot. And I understand that there was an attempt to rezone the lot about a decade or so ago for more motorhomes to go onto it. And the neighborhood came in and said no to the zoning because, of course, they're asking for a rezone. So consultation was required. Now, under the existing zoning, there's no requirement for community consultation or community discussion on the lot. And so effectively, there's a pending subdivision application. And I don't know as a member of the public yet what that looks like, but it could be for up to 104.18 acre single detached houses. So probably they're trying to get their subdivision application in before the 2024 OCP review, where hypothetically the zoning on the lot could be up for discussion. I'm not entirely sure how OCP reviews work, having not been through one before. So currently, with a lot this size, with so many homeowners living alongside it and no requirement for consultation, it's basically putting the community in a position where it doesn't seem at this stage there should be some mechanism there whereby there can be some consultation, discussion, perhaps negotiation, if there is going to be a subdivision development put in to help support the neighborhood. Development would significantly impact the quality of life of the residents. Like if the garbage truck goes by, you can hear it like all the way through the area. It's like a sloped area with a little mountain, and sound really travels. So if there's going to be, for example, that level of construction going on, and this perhaps taking 10 to 20 years, it's literally going to mean that people that live there are in a construction zone for that period of time. So on top of it, there is this case for conservation. So it's a coastal Douglas fir moist maritime bioclimactic zone. We understand that this type of bioclimactic zone is effectively, it's basically on like a massive decline. There's less than 1% of it left with actual oak growth in it. And effectively 49% of it has been permanently converted to human activities. So this type of forest, there are organizations that are specifically working on trying to conserve this type of forest. So there's something called the Coastal Douglas Fir and Associated Ecosystems Conservation Partnership. And the Gulf Islands, Vancouver Island, there are toolkits to help people conserve this type of forest land. It's voluntary, of course, but it's, you know, effectively one of those ecosystems that provides a high level of habitat for a huge array of species diversity. And in our case, for example, if we just remove all those trees and put in a bunch of houses, like the heat island effect is going to go up exponentially. We're effectively going to be losing like an ecosystem buffer that's also helping to create like I've never hit a bear on the highway kind of thing, but if we take that out of that corridor there, it's going to mean that there's going to be a lot more nature ending up on the roadways. For the residents that actually live there, this creates a higher quality of life for them. So the land is zoned for suburban residential development or for parks, schools, and green space. So it could be a park. And so here I understand that the motion that I can ask of council would be something along the lines of to send a qualified environmental professional to determine if there are any species or ecosystems at risk. I know that the developer has had somebody go in and start doing this type of assessment on the property, but if you talk to the residents there, they've seen all sorts of different types of species, birds, etc., that have been coming through there over the years that are on the red list, green list for provincial and federal legislation for species. So this is what we heard when we walked around the lot. Of the 33 people we spoke to, 32 wanted it to stay as forest or park, and only one indicated either forest, park, or subdivision. People are worried about the volume of houses, saying it's too many. People are wondering about things like green corridors and setbacks to mitigate construction, protection of wildlife corridors, and also that the 19 acres is currently undermanaged. So homeowners that are on King, closer to the highway, and up on Chilco have had significant challenges with trees because of lack of management. So dead standing, limbs coming down on people's lots, on top of people's sheds, buildings in the back. The people who are on King closest to the highway were actually like upset because they've been trying to get management support for their properties that are abutting the 19 acres. So there's already a management issue there currently on the lot. And for people who are over on the Chilco side, people are asking about where will the road access be? There's an obvious potential location with some grading issues, but effectively it's called Babine Street, but this will also add another layer of car traffic where there are kids, pets, bears, etc., in addition to the highway in Chilco. So affordable housing, I sit on the committee on municipally owned lands, and I've come to learn through that process, which has been a great education, that Powell River needs more affordable housing. This isn't going to be affordable housing. It's not going to be like the Blueberry Commons that has a covenant written on it, so it can't be sold to a developer that's mandated for affordable housing. These are going to be houses, but by the time they're done, built, and sold, they're going to be in the $800 to $1 million range. A development of this length that will take this amount of time. I've talked to other construction people, and I've heard that the top volume of houses that can be done in 1 year in Powell River by the biggest developer here is 8. So effectively, at the range that they can put in for subdivision, at the cost of housing, this isn't going to be producing the type of housing that this municipality is looking for right now. So the request for motion to council is please direct municipal staff to discuss with the owner developer with the intent to create options for our alternative development plans. So could there be a win-win? Could this actually not be like us versus them, or private property versus conservation? Or is there a way to kind of open up this conversation so that there is some interface between the community and the owner? We understand that the owner had died. He had wanted it to stay the way that it was, but his child or children have inherited, and now they're moving towards this development process. So the question here, that's just a rumor. I'm not saying that it's fact, but that's the information that I have so far. So is there something that could be proposed? Could land be swapped with the owner developer for another parcel closer to services that doesn't have 50 houses abutting the lot and isn't CDF MM? This would enable the city to provide a lot with zoning for mixed use, high density, including a percentage for affordable housing. If they're a good, reputable developer from the Vancouver area that want to come and do development here in Powell River, could they do something that fits in with the needs of the municipality? If they were putting one mixed use building in the back there on that 19-acre lot, might be more interesting than up to 100 houses or something along those lines. And the community might feel like maybe the forest land there could be protected or whatnot. So just thinking about options, ideas, thoughts for what potential there is there. The existing land could be converted to parkland. There is a parcel already of municipal parkland on that lot. That's about 2 acres. So this would create a maintenance pathway for the property, conserve the CDF-MM, and help wild would be awesome. So there's the City of Powell River Catholic Regional District Acquisition Fund for parks and recreational areas. The community, or another option could be that the community would be given time to fundraise with a conservancy organization and put the land into a conservation trust. So what I'm really looking for here is like options, ideas, possibilities, ways that this could be a better thing. So
your time is up.
Okay.
These are the motions
Great.
that you're suggesting, correct? All right.
Yeah.
We'll start with questions. We're focusing on questions first. Councillor Doudt.
Yeah, my question's actually a question for staff, since it's been talked about. Is there any applications for building permits or rezoning or service agreements for this piece of property that staff is aware of?
Currently, there is not an application. We haven't received an application. We've had some preliminary discussions with the owner and their consultant, but we are, I think pending is the right term. There's an expectation that a subdivision application will be submitted.
And just as a follow-up, is it correct that anything that they want to do to subdivide that land to that matches the current zoning would not require any kind of council resolution or community consultation? Or
that's an accurate statement. I would, highlight the difference between a discretionary approval and an approval for subdivision. When somebody meets the guidelines laid out in our zoning bylaw, there's not a discretionary component to it. So in this case, a discretionary approval would be a rezoning application or a development variance permit application. So if the application comes in and does not require a variance, there isn't actually any kind of communication between the applicant and council.
Thank you.
Councillor Southcott, then Councillor Almeida.
Thank you. Interestingly, I think the city has a membership in the CDFCP, Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership. The question I have is about densification. And this is definitely a question that's come up a number of times. So I suppose this question is for staff as well. Questions come up a number of times around this table in recent years. I know even our existing policy aims at infill, and this could arguably be called infill, but the infill, my understanding that we're really aiming at is infill closer to the more dense core of our community, which then will enable people to avoid using automobiles, use other forms of
Time for questions, Councillor Southcott.
So the question is, does staff have any idea, or have you considered, or would you be interested in considering any possibility of land exchange or any other possible ideas that might entice a developer to develop in a way more consistent with our policy intentions than this infill up in Wildwood?
Jason, perhaps I can answer that. No, staff would have to obviously have a discussion with council before it considered anything like that. And I think the most appropriate thing is to take the information received today, create a staff report for council to look at a council meeting. So find options. I know Jason, as approving officer, has a number.
Can you check to see if your mic's working? I want to make sure that folks can hear online. Yeah.
Thanks. Everyone knows
So
I'm
now you can
technologically challenged. And Jason has a number of options open to him as approving officer as well. But I think what we need to do is create a staff report in response to the input and bring it forward at a future council meeting.
Thank you. Maybe there might be other questions from council that might inform what sort of information we'd be looking for. Councillor Almeida?
Yeah, if we go the report way, this might get answered there too. But Director Gao, can you clarify? Because I'm looking, well, what I think is the zoning bylaw, and I'm not seeing the land size designation for RA1, because RA, the 0.18 that Ms. Dent has referred to, is smaller than my property in Westview. And I was under the assumption, maybe incorrect assumption, that RA1 would be a larger lot size. What is there a minimum requirement?
Through the chair, yes. So RA1 is a minimum of 730 square meters, as is R2, as is R1. So that's a standard across the board. The 0.18 is an acre. Maybe that's the confusion.
Other questions? Councillor Plum?
Just you mentioned the Powell River Rumor Mill. It's always working overtime. Appreciate your candid comments today. Is there any truth to the number 104 in terms of what we're being told here today? Have you had any discussions?
I got those from city staff.
You did get it from city staff?
I didn't make those numbers up.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Through the chair, if I could answer that more specifically though. So the 104 is when you take the overall 19 acres or 7.7 hectares and divide it by the minimum 730 square meters. What that doesn't equate, or it doesn't account for, is roads that would be deducted from that, as well as, even the cleverest draftsperson is going to have a hard time getting every lot down to the minimum 730 square meters. Based on previous subdivision applications that we have on file for that land, we were looking at 70 to 80 units. I would say that, again, somebody with some skill, a draftsperson, would probably be looking at somewhere in the range of 90 if they were really tightening things up.
Thank you for that clarification.
It's big.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor, actually, I'll do a question and then over to Councillor Doubt for a second round. When it comes to the OCP process, because I think, as my understanding is, OCP process doesn't rezone things, but it shares what we'd be welcome to, I guess. Can you talk about how an OCP process might impact this or any properties that are looking at development in the future?
Yeah, through the chair, the OCP is that visionary document. It's things that we would, as staff, be looking to inform a rezoning application. It's also a document that the approving officer may choose to look at through a process like this. So if there was clear statements in an official community plan that talked about seeing no additional growth or really finding ways to limit the type of growth we're seeing in areas, as Councillor Southcott pointed to, might not be ideal, that would be something that an approving officer could draw upon. Currently, that is not the case in our OCP, and those policies are not very strong.
Thank you. Councillor Doubt.
I actually didn't have a question. I was going to make a motion if we were done with questions.
I've got one more question. so there was reference to parkland acquisition strategy. We haven't had one in front of council yet, so I'm not actually sure. Does the city have parkland acquisition strategy? And can you just include that in any report back to council?
Absolutely. I can touch on it briefly now. 2021 Parks and Trails Master Plan was completed. And the findings from that process was the city is not in need of more park space. You have tremendous areas of parks when compared to other communities, per capita. And if we were to look at areas that have a deficit of parks, Wildwood probably wouldn't be one of those areas. But it's not to say that there's not an opportunity to explore some idea that was presented today.
Any final questions? I think we have a motion from Councillor Doudt.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that staff come back to council with a report on the current and future uses of the piece of property concerned with the delegation and the implications of the requests that are within the delegation. So you can come back to us and a report of the future zoning, etc., of the property, possible future uses, and the implications of the uses suggested and the actions suggested in the delegation. Then council could consider that with the full information in front of us.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Almeida. Do we have clarity on the motion? I know Councillor Doudt added some additional context. Can you read that back? Put you on the spot.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, but the motion is that staff be directed to report back to council on current and possible future uses of the property in question and the implications of the delegation's requests.
Thank you very much. Does that sound right? All right. So we have any comments on the motion on the floor?
The motions I put forward were specific. They came after
so
3 months of working on this.
Yeah, so they're not the motion on the floor at this time. So we have a motion on the floor and call the question. All in favor? Unanimous. Oh, Councillor or Mayor? Oh, aye, I heard.
Aye.
Great, so pass unanimously. And so the questions that you brought up will be referred to in the report that we get back from staff.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're off delegations. We're now on to item 4.1, correspondence. So we have a letter received from Stephen Miller. And so as it is sitting on the agenda, we have received it. We don't need a motion to receive, but are there any comments from council on this item on the agenda? Councillor Southcott.
Yeah, I just have the mere comment that I'm looking forward to us getting into discussing this exact topic again and have been for about 8 months now.
Thank you. All right, on to item 5, reports. So we have the Housing Accelerator Fund, which I know many members of council have been keenly interested in, and we're excited to hear from our not a director, or manager of planning.
Good afternoon. We're all getting used to the new templates for the staff reports. Okay. So the purpose of this report is to provide some information about the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation's Housing Accelerator Fund grant process, and to have some discussion about how big of a grant application should we make. So the Housing Accelerator Fund is kind of an unusual grant. It's results-based funding to encourage the right kind of housing in the right locations. The grant has funding targets that are specifically tied to achieving affordable housing and to achieving density of housing. Not like towers, but things like duplexes, 3plexes, 4plexes, row housing, and that kind of housing. The goal is that municipalities commit to actions that are achievable in 4 years, and the grant is evaluated based on 7 initiatives. So that would be 7 topic areas where staff would work through action items and report back on those action items as well as report back on the progress of the amount of new housing that's achieved in the grant timeline. So since we're talking about affordability, I just thought I would take this moment to remind us all about that we in Powell River have our own local definition of affordable housing. And it's housing that's affordable to very low income, and moderate income households. And generally speaking, that's households that make 120% or less of median household income. And this is from the Housing Implementation Plan. So the municipalities, I think what the Housing Accelerator Fund is relying on is there's a couple of ways that municipalities can achieve more housing supply. There's things that increase supply itself, and then there's things that increase the speed of bringing supply online. So factors that increase supply overall is just allowing more homes. So we have a finite amount of land. If we increase the allowable density on that land, we have more homes. That's pretty straightforward. We can also increase the supply of land, so the city can contribute city land, and then that increases supply. And then financial incentives can change the mix of that supply. So we can incentivize affordable housing, for example, or have density bonuses to change that mix. And then things that speed up supply is improving our internal processes. That could be e-permitting, streamlining approval processes, giving people more information before they apply for their development applications, so that so it results in people getting their building permits faster, or other kinds of development permits. So the potential funding, something that we would have to do if council approves staff applying for this grant is give some information about historical development trends in Powell River and what we see that looking like in the future, and the kind of impact that the grant application could have on changing those trends to a more positive direction. So historically, what this grant shows is historical new buildings coming online since the 80s. The blue line at the top is single detached homes, and the yellow line on the bottom is everything else, from duplexes all the way up to apartments. So business as usual is we could anticipate there being 229 new units of housing delivered by 2026. Our housing implementation plan and our housing needs assessment says that we need 770 in the same period. So business as usual means that we're delivering less than a third of the housing that our housing implementation plan says that is needed to meet our community's needs for housing. So staff ran a couple of scenarios about what kind of funding we might be eligible for receiving through this grant. Again, reminding that this is a results-based grant and money is allocated based on a commitment to deliver additional housing beyond business as usual. So the first column on the left is business as usual, 229 new units of housing by 2026. To meet the minimum requirements of the grant, we'd have to commit to delivering 25 more units than that. That seems pretty straightforward, and that would likely result in about $1 million of funding from Canada, from CMHC if we were successful, if we were a selected community. On the other extreme, if we said we want to achieve our housing targets and we want to be bold, we're going to commit to 770 new units of housing by 2026, which is 541 more units in business as usual. We could be eligible for $16.6 million of funding. And then in between, we ran some scenarios. What if it's 100 new units that we commit to? What if it's 250 more units that we commit to? There's a whole range from $3 million to almost $8 million of funding. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but the point is that to get from the minimum requirements all the way up to meeting our housing needs targets, the way that CMHC is going to evaluate the grant application is based on a couple of criteria, and our application would perform approximately the same regardless of how many additional houses we commit to. So if we commit to 100 new homes or 250 more homes, the results in terms of evaluation criteria would be very similar to the 541 new homes. That's the key message for this slide. So I'm going to move from the funding discussion over to talking about initiatives, and I'm not going to dwell too long on that. And then I would love to hear your comments on this potential application. So a requirement for the application is to have 7 action plan initiatives, and the city would be evaluated on an annual basis for its progress in completing these action plan initiatives. These are action plan initiatives that have to be completed in the grant period, which is 4 years. So staff have come up with a couple of ideas for ways to increase the supply as well as increase the speed of delivering building permits. One is updating bylaws, basically so that addresses the zoning issue, so that more and more kinds of housing are allowed in more places. The second is e-permitting, which would be to improve our software so that people can do their applications online. That's improving the speed of delivering building permits. The third initiative is reducing development barriers by providing more information to the public and developers ahead of time. So that's improving our mapping, showing our zoning on an online map, showing our active permits on a map, and other ways of providing information ahead of time to people who are interested in development. The fourth, which is facilitating invisible density, encouraging more secondary suites and carriage houses, is something we've already made great progress on. And a good thing about this grant is that activities that have been completed since April of last year are eligible action items. So we try to mix, we try to come up with ideas that are achievable, because we've already made good progress on them, as well as really big impact ideas like the e-permitting one. Number 5, facilitate infill development, which would be to look at our parcel sizes and review our zoning to see how easy it would be to have higher density housing like plexes, 3 plexes, 4 plexes in our single family neighborhoods without people needing to amalgamate or change their lots. As just one idea in that initiative. Number 6, encouraging affordable housing. So we need a bunch of policies on how to put money into the Housing Reserve Fund, how to take money out of the Housing Reserve Fund, and how to sustain our Housing Reserve Fund with funding. So that's a bucket of work that needs to be done that this grant could support. And then the last would be prepare city land for development. So we could acquire more land, do pre-development studies, and other kinds of work to facilitate the use of city-owned land for housing. Staff estimate that these 7 initiatives would take about $3 million to fund, which if we then go back to the funding slide, if we commit to 100 or more units, then we're sort of at break even on the grant money. And if we commit to producing more units, then there could be surplus money that goes towards community infrastructure, whether it's acquiring more land, active transportation projects, and other kinds of infrastructure related projects. So I think I will leave it there and happily answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, let's start with questions. Councillor Doudt.
First off, when I read the agenda, I was jumping up and down for joy to see this is in there. You know, might not be surprising because I mentioned it before. I think it's great to see the application coming. I've got a couple of questions. Do you know when the deadline for applications is?
Through the chair, yes, I believe it's August 18th. It's just over a month away.
Okay, so there's a little bit of time, and I'm glad we're close to that. One comment I've had is in my reading of all the documentation that they have, it's possible to use some of that funding if there's enough funding in the package for fire halls. And I'd like to suggest that we just put a line in about the fact that we need a new replacement main fire hall to cover that in case it's determined sometime in the process to use some of that funding for fire hall construction, because I think that's possible. It's great. I had a napkin calculation of how many dollars I thought the city could be eligible for. And I'm glad you got very close to that. And I don't see why we wouldn't support this. I'd like to see it go forward to council with option C, because I think that would be the best one for the community.
All right, let's continue questions right now. Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Chair. kind of a multi-part question. Ms. Ferguson, you said last year we did 133, that was units of permits, is that right? So
Yeah, through the chair, it was an average of 133 units per year that got building permits from 2018 to 2022.
and then you might not know this offhand. Do you know what percentage roughly of those were single family or single development units versus units that were, even if it's a home and a carriage home, like how many of them were one development versus like, yeah, multiple?
Through the chair, great question. I don't recall the specific number, but the vast majority were single detached.
Okay, so then theory is if we just did a focus on higher dwelling or higher density developments, the same amount of time you guys can execute a whole lot more, right?
Through the chair, that's correct. Just going to nerd out for a second. If people apply for Part 3 buildings, which are multifamily buildings, very generally speaking, those building permit applications come with schedules that have been approved by professionals. So it's generally speaking less work for our building department to process those compared to carriage houses, for example.
Questions, Councillor Selfcott?
Thank you, Chair. One of your blocks in the 7 or 8 things that you could do for the $3 million. Yeah. Number 2, is that the same as what your department applied for a year or two ago that was worth about $500,000 from the province that would really streamline permitting?
Through the chair, that's correct.
So that would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, we would be very excited about that.
Thank you.
Other questions for first round? All right, I've got some questions. Councillor Dowd mentioned fire hall, and this community amenity infrastructure, I think, was mentioned as a specific purpose. I don't see that in what we would spend, but are there any restrictions on the surplus? Like we could decide if we need to upgrade sewers to support this housing or fire hall or whatever. Are there restrictions on the surplus if we were to go a surplus route?
Through the chair, the way I understand the application is that we would need to identify the 7 initiatives, and we would need to commit to an increase in housing delivery.
Yep.
And then the money would be allocated based on that. And then there's a list of eligible things that the money can be spent on. So it sounds to me like it's quite broad.
What I mean, though, is if our initiatives cost $3 million and we apply for the 9 or whatever, I mean, there's more money in there than what these initiatives cost. And so then we're flexible in what we spend that additional money on.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Other question. There's 2 items that I'm wondering if they fit into any of these. For example, the report mentioned Housing Authority. It's not on the slide, but I just wanted to mention that. One thing that I saw at the UBCM Housing Summit was different communities doing like pre-approved templates. Like if you use this template for a carriage house or use this template for a 4-plex, you will be approved. Is that meant to be in one of these, or is that already in one of these, or can we add it to one of those?
Through the chair, I think that the bucket of ideas that's reducing development barriers could cover something like that. And staff could also look into those programs. I think there's some questions about their uptake, how much impact they're having, and we're really looking for things that are going to have tangible impact.
Okay, thanks. And then the other one I was curious if where it might fit in here is like support for community organizations that, you know, given enough support, would be interested in maybe developing housing. I haven't spoken to these groups, but I'm thinking about the Legion and their land, or the Cranberry Senior Center and their land. Fantastic opportunities to maybe combine housing with their space in the future. And so where might that fit in here, or would it?
Through the chair, I think reduced development barriers is a good place for that too.
Okay. Great. And I think those are my questions. Any other questions? Councillor Palm.
Just one important question for me through the chair, and that is, there's a lot of figures here, a lot of funding available. Are there any potential risks or strings attached from a financial perspective for the city of Powell River?
Through the chair, excellent question. The CFO provided a financial analysis The short version is that the funding is allocated in 25% chunks once every year for the 4-year period. And the city provides progress reports along the way. The last 25% is forfeitable if the goals aren't achieved. But the financial analysis appears to show that that it might be worth risking not achieving those targets for the option C, because the other 75% would be allocated already. The other risk is staff capacity, that the same people who would be needing to process an increased volume of building permits at a faster rate are also the same staff that I'd need to be working with to inform bylaw updates and things like that. So they could be quite taxing on staff to deliver.
Staffing costs could escalate if we got a great deal of this funding.
Through the chair, staffing can be paid for through the grant. However, it's not a main intent of the grant. The grant's intended to result in sustainable change, and this is only 4 years of funding. But yeah, something for us to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, on to discussion. Any comments that you would like to share with our manager of planning? I will go first then. I'm looking around here. So at AVICC, Councillor Doubt next. At AVICC, I went to a presentation where a federal staff member was there, and they were very clear that this is incentive money. Like, they want to get this money out to encourage, and that last 25% is results based. So echoing what you're sharing here. And I really appreciate that we can go back to April of 2022, and they did confirm that at that session as well, so that we can acknowledge progress already made. And so this is quite exciting. I'm concerned for capacity, and I like the idea of hiring planning staff, or some of these pieces probably could be contracted out, but I suspect that people need to do this work, and that's going to cost money, and that's why we're looking for $3 million to support that. Of all the things that I am most interested in here are the things that support affordable housing, and especially density near city services. So I'm especially keen on number 6, but I also know that like 2 and 3 and 1 help make that possible. So of all the things, I'm especially interested in those slightly more dense, affordable housing options. I noticed on one of your slides, there was a box around the single detached, and basically you're telling us we don't need to build any more single detached. It all needs to be semi-detached or more dense. Is that correct?
Through the chair, thank you. I forgot to mention that. So the numbers in the meeting housing needs column, where the box circles the 146 units, is because our housing needs assessment said that we've gone over supply of single detached homes. And so to meet our housing targets, we would have to reduce the delivery of the single detached homes and see more multifamily.
Okay, thank you. But overall, yeah, I'm super excited, and I know in speaking and hearing council speak over time in meetings, I feel like this is an issue we all have a lot of drive for, and would be willing to strive for. I like the idea of going full tilt for this. Councillor Doubt, and then Councillor Southcott.
Oh, I have a motion to make. And the motion is that staff be directed to complete a Housing Accelerator Fund application. And I'm not sure whether we can do that here at this meeting or whether it has to go to council, but perhaps staff can help out on
that. Through the chair, you can direct staff at this meeting.
Okay, fantastic. So we have a motion on the floor. We've got a seconder. And so to just to reiterate, Councillor Doubt, you're looking at an application that would meet housing needs targets, that last column?
Outlined in the report. And it's an application to the Housing Accelerator Fund to do the things mentioned in the report for the city and accelerate housing.
So it's option C. All right. Any further discussion on this? All right, I'll take that silence as excitement. I'll call the question. All in favor? All right, you have unanimous support. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Oh, comment from Councillor Southcott.
Actually, I have a question that stimulated by your comments, and that is, can you estimate what the effect of the innovation of instituting e-permitting would have on staff requirements? Like, would e-permitting like save a whole FTE, something like that, or can you put a figure to it?
Thank you, Councillor Southcott. When we prepared the grant application a couple of years ago for e-permitting, just having a form where people can type in their own information and it goes directly into our system, we estimated would save 10% of our whole building department's time. That's 4 people. And that's just one feature from e-permitting. So if you add on having more information out there, responding to calls, scheduling is another really time-intensive thing. It would be significant time savings for our department once implemented, but it will take a lot of effort to implement across multiple departments.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, we've got draft 2023-2026 strategic plan interim CAO.
Thank you. Staff have been working on transferring, or I guess translating perhaps, a very rough generic document into something that resembles council's discussions from a good number of months ago. I think we've had discussions that it's a pretty generic document and that it needs additional input in order for it to be effective. We've also talked about a key tool for that is perhaps the information under goals and objectives that the annual report requires that council identify measurable goals and objectives. And so that component in itself could form part of this plan or form a subsequent document to that plan so that we could get the specifics in there, the measurable component of that. And so today we're looking at receiving input from council on the general plan that's presented and looking for any input you wish to put to add, and also any direction you want to provide regarding the more specific exercise of measurable goals and objectives as envisioned under the annual report.
Thank you, CAO. I'm wondering, maybe I have a sense that, you know, individual councillors might have very specific comments on some of the items in the strategic plan, and we could probably be going in a lot of different directions. I'm wondering if we could just first do a round of like high-level general impressions, and that might be able to focus our discussion a little bit, and I can help chair the meeting a little bit more effectively. So if we could do just around the table, high-level impressions, you know, are there areas in particular that you think needs work or you're concerned with? Anyone want to go first? Start with Councillor Southcott and then Palm.
Yeah, thank you. So I like basically what's included. However, I would also like to see included something that aims towards considerations of, I'd like to see climate somewhere in this plan. I think from the standpoint of, as it was suggested earlier today, coming electors, that is a huge priority. And I gained that impression after spending an hour and a half or 2 hours at Brooks back in the fall to gather information specifically to inform my input into strategic planning. It could also more broadly include asset management, both built environment and natural asset. So those are, in a nutshell, those are 2 things that I see really missing in this document the way it is right now.
Councillor Palm, any high-level comments before we dive in deeper?
Yeah, just I looked over the document. I agree with staff that we do need some specific goals and objectives identified in this process so that we can work towards that for the next close to 3 years now. That's very much needed. The other thing that I'm little not concerned, but would like to see an addition under community vibrancy to specify addition of more activity for youth concerning this social tablet related environment that we're in these days, more volunteer sport activities, that kind of thing in our community. And the one thing under economic resiliency I'd like to say is something definite along the lines of retention of, it says grow the tax base, but I like some reference to industrial taxation incorporated there.
Sorry, can you just flesh that out a bit for us?
Well, I'm thinking about the mill site specifically, that we need to grow our industrial tax base, which is down in the dumps at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Almeida.
Yeah. I don't think I've had a full chance to digest everything, and unfortunately I missed the tail end of our conversation back in March. This is my first go around with anything strategic in my life. So, but on some of the conversation, I do agree on some measurables. That's the one thing that's probably missing. There's always a danger per se. If you put some numbers on there, there's always the chance you don't hit those numbers. But I think when we have numbers, both to start with and then also numbers to shoot for, even if we don't hit them, growth in the right direction is at least measurable, and we don't have any targets at this point to do that with. So I would agree on some measurables. We just had a discussion on our housing, and we've got a housing needs assessment, and that could also be another part that is not on our strategic plan right now, is how close are we getting towards our housing assessment, our housing authority. Might even want to throw in kind of our debt management ratio as well. And, I'm just throwing out ideas of numbers that are at the top of my head that can be included in here. And then we'd have to have some numbers of where we started. And then our annual report can include some progress from year to year.
All right, Councillor Doudt, then Mayor Wasno.
Oh. Well, what's here is a plan. Yeah, it's very open-ended, and we could adopt this plan and we could stick to it 100%, and we could look back in 2026 and discover that nothing had really changed. We'd all committed to the plan, but there are no specific actions. And I hear the CAO saying that. And what we need is to add, I agree that what we need is to add some specific action to that. And council has actually been through a lot of a specific process to try to do that, with literally hundreds of stickies on the wall about what's important to each of us. Quite a number of different things, but we haven't sat down with council all together and taken a look at prioritizing the actions that we want to do. I talked a couple of weeks ago about a page and a half of things that I think deserve to be in the strategic plan. I don't want to talk about all of those right now. I think they deserve a place in the strategic plan, but only if council can agree, at least in a majority, hopefully by consensus of everybody. But these are some things that council should try to achieve. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion is that we could do that in a focused workshop, and council could focus on that with the idea of working from this draft strategic plan and picking 2 or 3 concrete actions for each one of these 4 strategic heads and come up with something we can all agree would be a direction we'd like to see council go, and a guidance for staff when they're writing a report. They can look at it and say, what does council want to do? Here's some things council's trying to get at. Let's try to get a report out to council that will move the needle in the direction of some of these things. But I would like to put my oar in the water and suggest that I think what we need to do is to book some time. And I know it's hard in the summertime. I don't want to spend more time in a room talking about these things, but I think we owe it to the residents of the city to spend some time trying to get together on some focus and what we can all agree is important actions. And that's what my contribution is. Thanks for the work, but I think we need to add those specific actions, and we need to do it fairly quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Dowd. Mayor Wasno.
My understanding is that we had agreed that council would sit down in a session and work through a lot of the issues that Councillor Dowd just mentioned. So to me, it's essential that we do that.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wasno. For myself, I mean, I like many of us, there's probably specific things that I would like to see added here. But my main issue is, like others have shared, there's nothing measurable, and it's not, it doesn't represent, I think, this council's hopes and our goals. So like other councillors have mentioned, we haven't hashed out. We ran for reasons. We got elected by the public for reasons. And, you know, some of our interests in change might have impacts on, you know, on departments or staffing, or may, you know, maybe like they're complicated. We haven't sat down and hashed them out and prioritized. And like Councillor Dowd says, I hope some of the things that I would like the city to achieve get adopted by a majority or a consensus of council, but I don't know that yet. So maybe along the lines of what Councillor Dowd's proposing, do you have suggestions, Tom? Like, we're not shirt sleeves up right now in terms of next steps to actually get something that's more goal oriented, that speaks to why we're elected and what we hope to achieve for our community.
Yes, I guess I've conducted always with my previous councils a 1 or 2 day workshop where I kind of reverse engineer a strategic plan, where we go through a process where each member of council gets to put their ideas in terms of what they want to achieve, what they want to be known for at the end of their term, what's important to them, what they think is important to the community. Answer those questions. We get them up on a board, and we'll find, I know because I've interviewed each of you individually, I know I'll find tons of things in common. And then we go through an exercise where and how are we going to achieve that? And then as you reverse engineer it, you'll see that it fits under all 4 of those categories that we've already got listed. And so those workshops I've always conducted as the community charter talks about. They're in-camera workshops, so council can roll up their sleeves and you know, have some serious conversations. It might involve labor relations. It might involve information that's protected, but the charter actually clearly states that one of the reasons we can go in camera is to produce council's goals and objectives for the annual report. And so it's a good closed workshop session. All of it's reported out as we've talked about. You know, all the results are reported out, but it enables us to work together as a group. And so I'm hearing that council wants to do that. And I guess we'll try and schedule that and do it before everyone. Yeah, I'll try and schedule that and spend a day. And I think it'd be worthwhile after, you know, now I've been here a little over 9 weeks. I think I know your guys' agenda quite clear. And I think we can find a lot of in common. I think people have a lot of items that were there really linked together.
So we've got some comments coming up. Councillor Almeida.
Just more of a thought or suggestion on your lines there. And I guess a question too. Did we end up scratching the Finance Committee meeting for July, or is that still on the agenda?
No, that's been scratched. Okay. So that might
seem like an opportune time that we've all penciled in.
Talk to Jessica and Chris, and they'll reach out to you. As you know, we've got another half a day at least session in terms of our CAO search. We've got another full day in terms of looking at our infrastructure. And that might be more like important to have that first, so that it might shape your thoughts in and around what your priorities might be. So let us work on that, and we'll work with you, and we'll figure out a day.
Councillor Palm had his hand up.
Through the chair, I think it's important for the public to realize where we're at in terms of the timeline and how long this has taken for the strategic plan to come forward. And we've had a major setback in our first CAO search, which has taken us a lot longer than we thought it was going to. We had to bring Mr. Day in as our interim CAO. There's been staff changes. There's been a lot going on with liquid waste and everything else. So I just want to assure the public that we're working hard to make sure that these things happen and this council gets off and running sooner rather than later. And I like your suggestion of sitting down before perhaps you leave in order to do that, because we don't know how long it's going to take our new CAO to get his feet underneath him.
I think, or hers.
Or hers.
I think one of the goals that I have personally is that we enable the new CAO to move forward and not backwards. You know, I've been doing backwards work just about the whole time I've been here, trying to, you know, fill people and fill gaps and fill in council so they have adequate information. And so what really the objective would be that our new CAO would be moving forward. So I think, yeah, I'll put this as one of my priorities, and some of the other things might drop off, but I've got, anyhow, I'll try that.
Councillor Armida.
It's a small comment because this has been mentioned several times before in reference to the timeline it's taken to come up with a strategic plan. I was curious and looked back at the previous council, and I'm looking at the meeting agenda for December the 5th, 2019, which is when the previous strategic plan was actually approved on the council agenda. So we're still 4 or 5 months away from when it was approved for a previous term. I don't think it's going to take us that long to finish this one up, I hope.
Do you need a motion? Do you have enough direction?
Yes, we have enough direction. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. On to community engagement reports. Councillors, let's start with Councillor Almeida, and then I'll go through, and Mayor Wasno, you'll be last.
I had to dig back in the reservoirs. It's been a while since we've done an engagement report, and mostly just been events. I've had a couple of library board meetings since then, which everything's moving smoothly at the library, although we are the library's assistant chief librarian has moved on. That was well known, and the position is up for availability. So if you know someone with some experience in leadership, I believe that position is still open. I've had a chance to be involved at the tourism board meeting and actually a Townsite Heritage Society meeting. They have an event coming up in September for the first time. They're doing a plein air event, so that'll be something different and new in the community. Yeah, had a chance to be part of the chamber AGM, and of course we were all at the C3 forum with our Tla'amin neighbors and the QRD last month. And then of course had a little bit of chance to attend Prisma and Cathalmu, and looking forward to the longer sports this week.
Thank you. Councillor Doak.
Oh, it's been a long time actually since I had a community engagement report. I'm on a lot of exciting things have happened. I had the honor of representing the mayor at the VIU graduation ceremony up the hill at their campus. And first time I've actually visited the campus. We had a good lunch, a good turnout of students there. They have a kind of a different graduation where people graduate from different programs at different times, and some people had been coming back, but that was a great experience to talk to the people from VIU. Also filled in for the mayor at the Brooks graduation. That was quite a show to see all the young people. And really what really impressed me there was hearing about the varying aspirations of all of the young folks who were graduating and where they were going in their lives and what they expected, and how many of them had as a goal going away and getting more education and coming back here because this is the best place in the world. So they weren't all talking about going into the world to make a life somewhere else. They were talking about coming back to this place because they love it and because it's such a good place. That's pretty good. I enjoyed the C3 meeting that we had that was explorational. I don't know if that's even a real word, but exploring the idea of how we can get together and how we can work more effectively together as three governments in the neighborhood. And I have a lot of hope for that. We've got work to do in the future, but it's the first time in a couple of years we've actually got together face to face, and talking to each other is going to be the solution at the end of the day. I've been to the Wildwood and the Westview, not the Westview, the Townsite Ratepayers Association meetings through June, and it's all very interesting. The Townsite Ratepayers Association is a very positive group. I want to make an announcement that on July 15th, the Townsite Ratepayers is organizing a Townsite garage sale for the morning. So if you need anything that you haven't put out on the road with a free sign on it, if you want to go get some more stuff from other people, you can go to the Townsite garage sale on the 15th. And then in the afternoon, they've organized the second annual Townsite street party with a show and shine on the street and everything. And, you know, I know there's other things going on that weekend, but stop by Townsite and enjoy it. And the other two things that were amazing were Prisma and Cathalmia. Prisma, you know, I learned last year about the master class series that they have. If they've got 4 or 5 cello players and they've got a world-renowned expert cellist, will go through and teach people who already know just about everything there is to know how to turn performance from good into amazing, and that they can do that in 15 minutes with a few words is something to see. Then you add on to that the performances in the evening. Cathalmia, I was, you know, we got, as council members, some of us got free tickets to go to the opening and the closing, and it's just amazing that you can go and get entertainment like that in Powell River, which I don't think you can find anywhere else in British Columbia, all under one roof for a bargain price right here at home. And to have this many visitors from around the world come here and recognize the community is great. So proud to participate in a lot of those things. And I'm looking forward to the events of this coming weekend and through the summer. So
thank you.
Enjoy your weekends in summertime.
Councillor Southcott.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to screen through a bit of a list, and I will provide this for staff so you can cut and paste. I also attended the VIU grad, and they've served some good food. It was Councillor Dowd did a good job of representing the mayor there. Appreciated his words, as well as at the Brooks cap and gown. Another fine job, fine words, and that was an extremely inspiring event, as were a few others that I've attended over the past month. There was the T-Showsome Trail opening I attended. Over at the CRC, drug checking spectrophotometer, which is now being operated up at Thalaman at the health center, I believe. This was an instrument that when I took chemistry at UBC cost like $250,000. They're now down to about 60 grand, and it is utterly phenomenal. They work as well as those amazing instruments back then, and are really accurate. The data that comes out is surprising to me even. So that was impressive. I attended an RCMP seminar for elected officials held in Nanaimo back earlier in June. It was a very interesting event. I just want to mention that a couple of questions I sent in were not addressed at all, but an awful lot was addressed, and it's pretty impressive what that service has to encompass in changing technology. They expect that crime prevention and the work that they're doing is going to be moving far more into cyber concerns it is now, and it very much more very soon. However, speaking of silos, as has come up more than once today, there is a deep one between emergency medical and what the RCMP provide, and that is something that probably is a very thorny issue that is probably the reason why it didn't come up at this seminar, because one of their big problems is responding to mental health wellness checks. Being a health concern, that's why I asked that question. So that's still floating around out there. And the other question was their own, looking after their own staff in that regard as well. So these are questions that are pertinent and have yet to be answered. But I did very much appreciate a very professionally delivered seminar. Westview ratepayers, along with Councillor Doudt, oh no, Councillor Elliott was there. Sea Cadets Annual Awards and the Army Cadets as well. I attended the Regional Emergency Planning Committee meeting, as well as the an inaugural meeting for the Regional Emergency Executive Committee. That group is probably going to need some education. There's some very new and fairly unfamiliar people unfamiliar with the program here, and our program it's been around a long time. It's very developed, and it represents some amazing skill and training, education, and real example of regional cooperation. I attended a Walk With Me event up in Lund, which was basically focused at addictions and all the cultural complications and what we can do about that. The Chamber of Commerce AGM, which Mayor Formosa is now their chair. Prisma and Cathalmew. The Cathalmew Grand Concert was a tear-evoking, inspiring event. The whole thing, my cello-playing wife absolutely loved those cello master classes. There's a Haitian Reconciliation Circle and C3, yes, and the Resource Recovery Center tour. We were given that's soon to be coming into operation. Canada Day events. I helped out at a barbecue for the young people at Willingdon Beach. And various meetings with various people and various issues over all this time. Yeah, all the normal stuff we do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Southcott. Councillor Palm.
I'm just going to mention a couple items. And the attendance of the private forum 3C in Clahaman, well attended by all of council and RD and Clahaman band, and we had a very good discussion during that format, and I'm very pleased to report that our CAOs from various jurisdictions are getting together to plan a road ahead. We can have our meetings held on a regular basis. So that's all I can say at that point until we get the report. I'm happy to say I'm a paid up full member of the Westview Ratepayer Society. Had to spend $10 to get in their last meeting. I was not a member up until then, but I will be a non-voting member of that organization, and I just want to compliment the people that are involved with that organization. They're doing a fantastic job. Their membership is climbing through the roof, and they've got a lot on their plate going on. And with the new format of council, I have to say that, you know, my plate is not as full as it once was, and I want to thank Mr. Day personally for that, because it's given me some time to rebuild my home. So it's all good. Thank you.
All right, Mayor Wasno.
Thank you. Like all of the other councillors that have spoken, it's been a very busy 3 or 4 weeks. I was invited to speak on behalf of the city at Cathalmew, Prisma, Canada Day, and Terry Roberts' retirement. I agree with what everybody said about the wonderful musical festivals. I had 2 of the students that were at Prisma, along with their mother and their grandparents as guests. And so for 2 weeks, I heard what a wonderful place we all live in. And yeah, other than that, I'm not going to repeat what everybody else says. So Thank you.
Thank you. I'll focus on the ones that haven't been mentioned, though I do want to say a good place for council to volunteer and meet a lot of members of the public is at the Zero Waste Station at the Prisma on the Beach Festival, because everyone's going up and down the causeway. So I had lots of people returning their recyclables, but also chatting to me about council business. So that was great. Attended a kind of an information session on Renovate the Public Hearing. So SFU's got an initiative to research the public hearing and exploring better ways to support community engagement that leads to the outcomes that cities need. And so public hearings often happen very late in the process. They are quite contentious, and are there ways to explore doing things earlier on in ways that really get at the underlying needs and interests of members of the public. And so there might be pockets of money available to explore pilots in different communities. And so something might come of that, but that was interesting information. I've attended a couple, well, I think all of them so far, the Select Committee on City-Owned Properties, and I know a lot of other councillors have attended those, and I think they're breaking now until September, but we will have a report at council on Thursday. I attended Indigenous Peoples Day out at the Sailor Center at Tla'amin Nation. There was a fantastic cultural display that Drew Blaney had pulled out of their archives, so basketry and fishing materials, and that was fantastic. And a group of us were making cedar hearts, weaving hearts out of cedar root. And the purpose of those, we were making 150 of them, was to gift to potentially all attendees, but at least the elders. As part of the upcoming canoe journey, they're stopping in Sechelt Nation and doing ceremony related to St. Augustine's and related to the confirmation of unmarked children's graves there. And then stuck around for the barbecue and drumming and honoring some of their youth and elders who were involved in soccer and music, and it was just a great evening. And then along similar lines, attended not the full session, but the opening part anyways of Randolph Timothy and Betty Wilson did a Iadjutham lesson at the library that was super well attended. Over 50 people were there. So there's definitely a yearning of residents to learn the first language of this region. And that was really great to see. I also wanted to put out a shout related to GRAD. I also attended the Lund Walk with Me that, did you mention that? Yeah, you did. Okay. But just in general, wanted to put a shout out to the folks who work in harm reduction at Tla'amin Nation and within the city and the region are doing great work. And an example of that is putting on bringing in the Walk With Me audio tour. That was fantastic. But also doing things like setting up at Wet Grad. So, it's not an officially sanctioned grad, but Wet Grad happens, and setting up, slightly outside of where those parties are taking place so that people that need, access to safe resources or rides or whatever can be supported, because we want to reduce the harm of those types of events, because they're going to happen. But how can we make sure that our youth stay safe? So just shout out to the harm reduction folks for doing that kind of work. And yeah, that's it for me. So now we're on to questions. There's a bit of lag, but I'll give us some time. For those who are watching online, you can call 1-833-782-7295. That's 1-833-782-7295. And the meeting ID is 941-26. Oh, let me start over again. 941-226-25, and then the pound sign. That's 941-226-25, and then the pound sign. And so while we're waiting for potential callers, I'll go to the media. No questions from the media today? Oh, yep.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. My question is with regard to the strategic plan. There was a presentation about it, some discussion. Councillor Almeida talked about timeline as well. And it would appear that Council will be having a half-day or day-long session to help resolve some issues surrounding the strategic plan. I'm wondering if there is a target for completion at this particular time or whether that's still in a state of flux.
I mean, I guess state of flux, but I'll look to our CAO.
Done by August 24th.
So
I thank the CAO for the response.
Yep.
That was my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glinsky. Any questions from the gallery? Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Roger Whitaker, resident of Cranberry. And the question's a three-parter. Does council know that law firms do not pursue financial contributions for class action suits? Is council aware that law firms call for participants? And the pony up is only information that qualifies a participant as a legitimate participant and a legitimate an active joiner in the possible proceeds if there is a settlement that happens. And does council understand that what we saw today was as a presentation was little more than a fundraising game and ambulance chasing, quite frankly?
Thank you for the questions. Any responses from council? Councillor Doudt.
Yeah, I just want to talk about the implication of your question. When you ask a question of council, you're asking a question that can only be answered by a majority opinion of the group. Okay, each of us has a different opinion. I don't know what council's answer to that whole question would be without having a discussion on it, but frankly, those implications are what I would expect to hear from staff about when we get a report from staff on the invitation we had to participate in a lawsuit.
Thank you. And also regarding fundraising, the organization is not asking for money. They're asking for a pledge, and it wouldn't be going to the organization that's doing the campaigning based on the information that I've seen. So it's not fundraising for the organization. And I think the other questions that you raised, you know, we might also have questions similar, and we expect that we'll get a staff report telling us about that other municipalities' motion and any implications thereof. So those might be answered there. Thank you.
Yeah, we can hope. Thank you.
Any questions coming in on the phone or online by email? Shaking a head. All right. I think we're ready to have that final motion to go in a closed meeting. Councillor Almeida, if you could read that out for us.
I move that following the adjournment of this meeting, council move into a closed, I should say committee of the whole, move into a closed meeting to discuss matters covered by the community charter under section 90.1, A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And N, the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under a provision of the subsection or subsection 2.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Southcott. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Almeida, seconded by Councillor Southcott. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We're